Okay, so it's been a couple of weeks. I'm sorry we had to cancel last week. It was a big storm, and we just didn't want anyone to slip out in that kind of weather. So we're having class today. Next week I'm out of town, so we'll have a class again in 2 weeks from today, Be'ezras Hashem. There's one last point. Hi, Patricia. Take your time. There's one last thing that I'd like to discuss in one last little piece that we're going to be talking about in the KUZARI. Regarding the whole concept of when a Jew serves Hashem, he should feel like he's part of the community. And we talked about prayer being done b'lashon rabim, in the plural. And he quoted Plato as saying that a person should feel that the community portion which he contributes to the larger segment of the community is vital and important, because not only does it keep the community strong, it keeps the individual strong as well. So that's what we've been discussing up until now. Because, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the bottom paragraph on page 305 had compared this to a person who is, compared this to a body. Every person is a different organ of a larger body. So if the arm refused to relinquish its blood during a bloodletting, the entire body would perish, and the arm along with it. And so we have to realize we're in this all together. We quoted a midrash which said that if we're all sitting in a boat and one person decides to drill a hole underneath his portion of the boat, he can't say, well, what do you want from me? It's my portion of the boat. The whole boat's going to sink. And so that's the attitude that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi takes, and that's how he applies it to the whole concept of communal prayer, of tefillah, either b'tzibur, a davening with a minyan, or using language that is inclusive of the entire Jewish people. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi expands this, and he says now on page 306, in subparagraph number 7, because the amount of one's community portion is not something that logic clearly dictates, God commanded the laws of tithing, gifts, sacrifices, and the like, which represent the financial aspect of one's community portion, so that there is a ratified into halacha is the concept of tithing. There was only one time in Jewish history where a community drive was made and the Torah said, give whatever you want and how much you want. When was that? At the building of the Mishkan. But from that time forward, there was a tax that identified how much each person should give. Because when it comes to building a Mishkan, there's a need for everyone to feel that it is my heart that is participating. And if I give too little or too much, so then my heart is not, as an individual, is not attached to this whole. But in all other aspects of Jewish life, especially when it comes to supporting the Kohanim and the Leviim in the temple, so there are very, very specific amounts and percentages that are designated, because it's difficult in all other instances for the individual to know how much should I give, because we all have conflicting interests within us. On the one hand, we know it's right to give. On the other hand, we also know it's right to protect our assets for the sake of our immediate selves and families. So how do we create that balance? And therefore, Hashem says, I acknowledge you have that inner conflict, so here is the laws of tithing. Give 2% of truma, give 10% of ma'aser, give this amount for challah, give this amount for the shearings, every 10th animal should be donated to the temple, and so forth and so on. So, therefore you have it's not something that logic clearly dictates. Hashem says these are the amounts. Actions which help uplift the community include prescribed deeds such as Shabbos and festival observance, Shemitah and Yovel and the like. Those in the category of speech include prayers, blessings, and praises. Behavioral traits include love, fear, and joy. This needs to be unpacked for just a moment. Because what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is essentially saying is that these are all communal activities. And the communal activities can be broken down into different categories. What categories did he break them down into? Financial, actional, or what we should really say is time-related observance that is on a communal level, prayer or speech-related worship, and number 4 is behavioral worship. So just once again, he's got financial, chronological, I suppose you could say, verbal, and behavioral. And he says all of these different categories involve communal worship. And this is very difficult to understand, because I can understand how financial involves communal involvement. I can understand how prayer involves communal involvement, because we've been speaking all along how your prayer has to be inclusive of all of Klal Yisrael. But what about the chronological observance? How is Shabbos and Yom Tov a communal activity? And finally, how is behavioral traits, love, fear, and joy, how is that a communal activity? So let's try and understand this a little bit better. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is not suggesting that those kinds of mitzvot, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Ahava and Yira, fear and love of God, are exclusively communal. But what he is saying is that there is a communal component to those observances. I have here in the handout that I gave you today is a sheet it's a photocopy from a sefer, a modern sefer, called Dibor U'Machshava. It is a commentary on Sefer Kuzari that was written by a Rav in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Shlomo Toledano. And I thought that he had a very interesting insight into this particular section, and I wanted to share it with you today. So in just explaining this paragraph, he explains as follows. We'll translate it. It's in modern Hebrew, okay, shall we? He says, Hishtatfut hachelek bakol. That the participation of the individual with the totality, with the entirety. Hayachid sarich imkein lirot tamid et atzmo kechelek min haklal. The individual must always view himself as being a portion of the whole. Ho'il v'rayon zeh eino holem kol kach et hasechel ha'enoshi. Because this concept is not always in alignment with the human intellect, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Tirgem otolanu hakadosh baruch hu lemitzvot ma'asiyot. God translated this idea that the individual has to consider himself or herself part of the communal whole into specific mitzvot. Now we'll explain why this is not intuitive. It is counterintuitive, actually, for the individual to view himself as part of the whole. And we'll explain why that is in just a second. But first, let's see what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is saying. He's divided into 4 categories. Number 1, Hishtatfut haprat birechush shel hatzibur. The participation of the individual in the finances of the community. Ma'asrot, matnot, kuhuna, v'korbanot. Tithes, gifts to the Kohanim, who are dependent upon the rest of the community for their sustenance, and the sacrificial order. You give every 10th animal as a korban. You give your firstborn animal as a korban, etc. Number 2, ishtatfut haprat b'havaya shel hatzibur. The participation of the individual in the chronology of the community. In other words, in the time relations, we are all on the same page chronologically. Every Shabbos, we're observing the same Shabbos. Every Yom Tov, we're observing the same Yom Tov. In that respect, Shabbos and Yom Tov are communal observances. Not that my sitting at my Shabbos table is a communal activity, but the observance of Shabbos together with the rest of Klal Yisrael. Right? Was that Shlomo Carlebach song? The whole world is singing. Sing a song of Shabbos, right? Everyone together. We're singing Shabbos together. Now you might be singing your Zemirot and I'll be singing my Zemiras, but we're all participating together on some level. Okay? So therefore he says, Shabbatot, Moadim, Shmitot, V'Yovlot. That it's Shabbos, Yom Tov, and also Shemitah and Yovel, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, every 7th year, every 50th year. So that's a communal activity. Number 3, Hishtatfut haprat b'sig v'siach shel hatzibor. The participation of the individual in the needs and the conversation of the community. And this is what we've been speaking about all along in the Kuzari up until now. Tfilot, brachot, tishbachot. Prayer, blessings, praises to Hashem. That's all part and parcel of our communal participation because we include all of Klal Yisrael and we say the same prayers as a matter of fact. So even the very fact that we are reciting the same words of prayer makes this into a communal activity. And finally, he says, and this is probably the most difficult one to understand, he says, Hishtatfut haprat be'aklim hamidot shel hatzibor. What do those words mean? The participation of the individual in the emotional climate of the community. Which means and he says, Ahava yirah simcha. We love together, we fear together, and we rejoice together. What does that mean? Can anyone offer an insight into what that means? Anyone want to make a suggestion as to what those words mean?
Well, I think we hold the same values, so we react in the same way to certain things.
Okay. I mean, yes. Go ahead, Sharon.
One people with one heart, right?
It's one people with one heart, but again, when things happen to the Jewish community, in 1967, when the Six-Day War was over, there was a national outcry of rejoicing, right? So it's not even having to do with festival or Shabbos observance, but when things happen to the Jewish people, we rejoice together, or we mourn together. And we know when it is time to come close to Hashem and to have a sense of love. We know when it is time to revere Hashem. So we try to do those activities together. It's not because they are periodical observances, but things happen over the course of the history of the Jewish people where we all feel our emotional involvement or investment within the national spirit of Klal Yisrael. So so this is the way Rav Toledano says, that's what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is referring to, is that when you feel that you're not just, let's say, that tragedy that happened in Israel where that young lady, Ora, what's her name? Ori, where she was murdered in the forest. It was all over the media. And there was all this on, I think it happened Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon. And all of Klal Yisrael was mourning together for this young lady. So that in itself, Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Sha'ar Avelei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. God should comfort you among the other mourners of Zion in Jerusalem, right? That in itself, that feeling that I'm not alone, that we are mourning together, that we are rejoicing together, that we are feeling something together, is in itself what makes us into a nation. That activity itself is what unifies us as a people. And therefore Hashem tells us that there are times when you're eis lispod ve'eit lirkod. There's a time to eulogize, and there's a time to dance, and there's a time for the Jewish people to do this all together, not as individuals, but we work as a community in rejoicing and in mourning together. Okay, so here's where I'd like to share with you the footnote of this Rav Toledano, who apparently is somewhat of a philosopher himself, and he introduces us to some modern philosophy to help us unpack what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has said. Now, notice what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said. He said in the beginning, the amount of one's community portion is not something that logic clearly dictates. Now, I had said, the simple understanding is that we're always conflicted between the individual and the communal. We feel a sense of devotion to the community, but we also feel a need of self-preservation. I can get lost within the larger collective, right? And so I need to preserve the sense of individuality. Now, He, however, takes a slightly different approach, and he says that based on modern philosophy, the modern philosophy of existentialism, it is actually runs completely counter to feeling that sense of collectivism and communal involvement. Let's see what he says. It's very interesting. I found it to be very interesting. If you take a look, he says, "Hasechel ha'enoshi movil le'individualism." He says, the human intellect really draws someone towards, what is that Hebrew word? Individualism. Okay, good. I'm glad that you're so good at translating. Ha'individualism ma'afien yoter et ha'intellectualim me'asher et ha'anashim ha'pshutim. V'yesh lahavin madua. He says, individualism, or that sense of that I am alone in this world, and that I am not a part of a larger whole, manifests itself more among intellectuals than it does among common folk. That's his assumption. That people feel more like they're individuals when they are intellectuals. When you are part of the common folk, you feel, I'm just part of the group. So why is that? Let's understand why that is. And he explains as follows: Uvechein kol adam ro'eh et sha'ar b'nei adam ki chitzonim lo ko'objektim. And he explains that everyone looks at the other as someone who is outside myself and an object. I don't look at another person as being a part of me. I look at another person as being objectively outside of myself. Lachein b'teit hakara Lachein b'teit hakara hu mitnaheg ki'ilu toda'ato hi hatoda'a hayichida hakayemet. So when he thinks about his consciousness, he doesn't see the other person's consciousness. I don't see what's inside your mind. All I see is myself. So that's the first thing that leads to individualism, is that I only think about myself because my self-awareness sort of overshadows everyone else's sense of awareness, because I don't see your awareness, I just see my awareness. So therefore, I look at you as the other, and I don't see you as I don't see your consciousness. I don't perceive it. But he says it goes further. Hafilosof hatzorfati Sartre ben hameya hachaf. Jean-Paul Sartre, yeah, a very famous French philosopher, the father of existentialism, the philosophy of existentialism. Abir haTorah hakiyumit, that's what the word means, the father of existentialist philosophy. He'emik b'rayon zeh. He delved into this idea. Hu amad al zeh ki hazulat mofia b'toda'at ha'adam al yedei mabato. His observation is that the other influences my consciousness through his observation of me. In other words, when I see others looking at me, it affects how I look at myself. What do we mean by this? Hu mistakel bi, va'ani tofes et atzmi kenir'eh, kemugbal b'mitziuti al yedei mabatehem shel acherim. Other people look at me, and I view myself through their viewing of me. I perceive myself as they look at me, and therefore, just as they objectify me and look at me as someone without consciousness, they also, I perceive that they are belittling my own sense of self as a result. Okay? So anyway, so b'sha'ah she'ha'adam tofes et atzmo mitoch mabato shel hazulat k'mitziut gufanit, when a person perceives himself as being objectified by another, then I am just a physical being without any depth of consciousness. Na'aseit hami'isa ba'atzmo habichila. He becomes, he starts self-loathing, and he becomes to the point of nausea. He becomes nauseous. Okay? Ofen mitziuto hayisodi. Ofan mitziuto hayisodi. In other words, it drills down to his inner essence. Ekev kach yesh netiya kannibalit b'chol adam lechasel et zulato. And as a result of this, there is a cannibalit instinct within every person to eliminate the other. What does he mean by cannibalit? Cannibalistic. Not related to cannabis, but cannibalism. Okay? He has a cannibalistic desire to eliminate the other. Because it is the way that you look at me. I mean, obviously, this is the reason why this kind of ideology is why so many people felt that philosophy took a wrong turn and started to derail in the late 19th and early 20th century. But anyway, this is obviously an extreme ideology, is that because I see you objectifying me and only you, because you view me as purely a physical being without that deeper consciousness, I start to feel nauseous about myself because I start to think that perhaps that defines me as well. Your view of me helps define me, and therefore I wish to eliminate you so that I can restore my sense of self.
That assumes no interaction.
That assumes no interaction, absolutely. It assumes just, you walk into a social gathering and you see other people looking at you. They know nothing about you. They immediately judge you based on your superficiality. So Sartre was of the opinion that this is actually a big downer for you. And it makes you feel resentful of all of the other people in the room because you feel they don't know me. And actually they have defined me, and you start to buy into their definition of you based on your externality.
It's like basically the secular culture today, like pop culture today. Where
Absolutely.
Teenagers are
living,
right?
This has become, now this has gone even more so in today's world because of social media, right? Because everyone is defined in the most superficial of ways.
Yeah.
It seeped into the Jewish world as well, with shidduch resumes and everything like that. But anyway, we won't go there right now. So Sartre, afilu higia likitzoniut machshavtit b'inyan haretzach, harotzeach chash ben chorin keshehu mechasel et zulato. There's a typo there. So he says he went even further in his extremism, and he said that this is the justification for murder. Because when you murder someone else, why do people commit murder? They commit murder because you have freed yourself from the objectification of the other. And that's, or sort of not justifying murder, but that's sort of the rationale that helps explain why people do this. Kach ro'eh hasechel ha'enoshi et ha'devarim. And that is how the normal human intellect, the normal human consciousness, perceives other people. So not only is there a conflict between the individual and the communal, but for Jean-Paul Sartre, there's actually a compelling reason why the individual does not wish to conjoin with others and be part of a larger community. Aval hasechel ha'eloki hodia lanu ki kulanu b'nei ish echad nachnu. But then there is another part of the intellect which is not identified or quantified by the secular philosopher, which is what he calls the seichel ha'eloki, the divine intellect. And Hashem gave us a neshama that transcends that base feeling of isolation. And it is that the part of our divine soul that reminds us that we are all unified, that we are all children of one Father. Kulanu nefesh echat. We are all part of the same soul, because we all know that our neshama is defined in Kabbalistic writings as chelek elokam imal, as a portion of God above. And we feel that sense of being but fragments, and the only way that our fragmentation can be unified is by joining together with a larger whole. Uchedei lechazek banu et harayon hazeh natan lanu hakadosh baruch hu mitzvot matimot. In order to strengthen that instinct that is in the divine portion of our soul, God gave us certain mitzvos which would strengthen that instinct. Okay. Comments? Suggestions? Yes, please.
It relates a little bit. So I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor, and my mom would often tell us that in the Holocaust, even though the atrocities and the humiliation and the torture was so unbearable, unbelievable, but yet somehow it was easier for some of the girls to handle it because they were together in one common problem. Then when they separated after the Holocaust and went on their own lives, and they all had individual problems, which weren't the same problems, and they were sort of isolated or individual in their own area of the problems, it was more difficult to somehow overcome and handle than that of when they were together.
So, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is, Sa'ar de Rabim Nechamahi. Chazal say that. They say that the pain of the many, when you feel that you are part of a collective going through pain together, it is easier to endure than when you are going through it as an individual. But I don't think that that's necessarily in opposition to what is being suggested here, because that's really a coping mechanism, right? I mean, we cope better when we know that other people are in this with us, are suffering through it with us. But as far as my feeling as an individual when I'm not suffering, that's the difficulty. It's easy to feel that you're part of a larger collective when we're all suffering together, and we all have to come and huddle together to be able to warm ourselves from the cold of the pain, right? That, I think we all understand. But where does the instinct for coming together happen at times when we're not suffering? And that's really the larger question. And I think that some of the mitzvot that we have, it's much easier to mourn together. I totally appreciate that. Is it easier to rejoice together? I don't know. So I have to be honest with you. Sometimes it's very difficult for me, on like Simchas Torah, to get in that circle and feel that sense of joy together with everybody else. It is because, first of all, I feel that perhaps I feel a little bit different in my approach to Torah study, and maybe the people that are in this circle are different in their approach. So there's a part of me that resonates with what Jean-Paul Sartre is saying, is that, there's a part of my consciousness that really just wants to be alone sometimes, and I don't feel connected.
Good thing you're a rabbi.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I got into this. Who knows? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think you have to be Jewish to feel this way. I mean, who was it that said no man is an island unto himself? John Donne?
Yeah.
I'm saying it's not a Jewish thing. Anyone who is in part of any kind of community or group feels that way.
Right.
It's not
Yes. So the truth is, yes, feeling that you're part of a community is a very consoling thing because you feel that you're not alone. And yet, what Sartre is trying to point out is that sometimes there is a pressing instinct within you to be alone, because you just don't feel that you fit in with everybody else, because no one gets me, no one understands me, is essentially what he's saying. And the fact that you need community in order to be healthy is borne out today in our society. As you were saying, that our teenagers today feel more lonely than ever before, because we have less of a sense of community today than ever before. The greatest gift that Judaism, and actually any religious community, the truth is, I look at it, I think Judaism has the most enriching type of communal experiences. But the truth is that there are other religious communities as well. I'm sure the Mormons in Utah have a very rich sense of community as well. Probably not as rich as ours, but rich nonetheless. I'm sure there are certain other religious communities that feel that sense of communal involvement as well. The benefits of being part of a religious community are actually more visible today than they've ever been before. But I don't think that negates what the philosophy says about the feeling sometimes that people feel that no one understands me. And I feel repelled sometimes by that, to want to withdraw into myself. Yeah.
Sometimes there's pressure from feeling in the community, especially young people, that I have to be a certain way.
I have to conform.
To be in the community, and they don't. and they lose their individualism, and that's what they're trying to express and
Yeah.
reach out.
Yeah. Anyone else? Patricia?
I think there's been quite a move away from the existentialism of Jean-Paul Sartre, because, as you pointed out, philosophy took a wrong turn, and he was a very gloomy man.
Sounds like it.
Very unhappy.
Yeah.
Um,
He didn't have any affection for Jews in particular either. My understanding is, yeah.
And there are other subsequent French philosophers like Alain Finkielkraut who are much more open and much more cosmic. But there is the social media phenomenon is almost a knee-jerk reaction. It's very shallow, but there is a pushback, and there is more and more of an emphasis now in certain circles on developing what they call emotional intelligence, EI. The ability not only to sympathize, which is one thing, but to empathize, to, instead of not seeing the other person and not having any interaction with them, being able to, it sounds intrusive, but get inside their head and say, yes, I can feel what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is considered in many circles now to be extremely valuable, and also developing it prevents criminality.
Yes, right.
Because really, the people who go out and murder have no emotional relationships.
They don't see the other person as,
Yeah, they see them as an object of hatred, an object of
yeah,
fear,
right.
but they can't get inside that other person's feelings.
Right.
So there is a movement, there is a pushback against this.
Huge amount of aggressiveness that's come to the fore. I mean, I see it every time I travel. People are more pushy, people are ruder, people expect more from the professionals that are running the airline. Have you noticed that, or is it that people are not as polite as they used to be? A year ago, I saw a fist fight break out between two men to determine who was going to be the first to get off the plane. They literally came to a fist fight on the walkway going off the plane. They were Americans, of course.
This is just sort of a counter to that, because we happened to be in New Zealand at the time of the Christchurch earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually supposed to visit there. We were going to spend Shabbos with the rabbi of Christchurch, which is an interesting title.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, right. Christchurch is the name of a city in New Zealand.
And we had to change our plans and switch things around. And this was a time of tragedy for the whole country.
Yeah.
And the people on the planes, and we were hopping around from changing reservations, changing our routes. The people in the airports, the people in the planes, the people driving the buses, everybody was pulling together, and they were so grateful that we hadn't canceled.
Sure. I mean, don't you remember 9/11, how polite everyone was and how compassionate everyone was? How quickly we forget. Okay.